Are you looking for precise and lucid explanations of various concepts in psychology? Hello everyone, I'm Dipali and welcome to my channel Psychology with Dipali, the best destination for very precise and detailed explanations of various concepts in psychology. So whether you're a student looking for subject matter or content in the field of psychology, or whether you're somebody who is interested in this wonderful world of psychology, then this channel is for you.
Hello, everybody. Today we will be talking about Grade 12, Chapter 1 Variations in Psychological Attributes as per the CBSE syllabus. And we are basically going to talk about topics like what is intelligence and the Uni-Factor Theory of Intelligence. So, what are we covering today? In this video, we are covering the understanding of the concept of intelligence, what is intelligence, approaches to studying intelligence, the theories within the psychometric approach, and the uni or one factor theory of intelligence given by Alfred Binet. So, let's begin. To begin the contents of today's topic, we need to first answer this question. And what is the question? There is an interesting question of the day. There was a person who actually studied law and had no formal training in the field of psychology. However, we know him today primarily because of the groundbreaking work that he did, which changed the field of psychology. So, do you know who this person was? So, the identity of this person will be revealed as I go ahead with the topics for today. So, to start with what is intelligence, we have two definitions, one given by Alfred Binet, which basically talks about intelligence being the ability to judge well, understand well, and reason well. So, it's a simple definition which talks about reasoning abilities, the ability to judge, and the ability to understand what is going on in the environment. The second definition is by David Wexler. It is a more comprehensive definition which basically defines intelligence as the global and aggregate capacity of an individual to think rationally and act purposefully, and to deal effectively with his or her environment. So here we're talking about global means overall capacity of an individual, which is an aggregate capacity. It's a sum total. It's a combination of capacities in the cognitive sphere of the person, which help the person to think rationally, to do rational thinking, and to act with intention and to deal effectively with his or her environment as in what is going on around him. Now, there are two approaches to studying intelligence. One is the psychometric approach and one is the information processing approach. The psychometric approach basically considers intelligence as an aggregate of abilities. It expresses the individual's performance in terms of a single index of cognitive abilities. So, what this means is that intelligence is the sum total of all the cognitive abilities that you have, and we can quantify this or give a number or value to this aggregate of abilities by using a single index. And that single index is, let's say, an IQ score. If I administer a psychological test which evaluates IQ of an individual or the intelligence of an individual, I will get a IQ score. So this IQ score is basically a single measure or a single index of my cognitive abilities. The information processing approach does not focus on measurement of intelligence. Basically, it focuses on the processes which are used in reasoning as well as problem solving. So it does not focus on how to measure intelligence, but what are the processing what is the process which is used by an intelligent person to behave in an intelligent manner. So all the processes which are underlying the cognitive functions and which make a person behave intelligently, that is the focus of study. So if you look at the psychometric approach, it basically is a quantification based approach, which means we can quantify the intelligence of a person. And how can we quantify or give a number to the intelligence of a person? By administering a psychological test. Once I administer a psychological test which evaluates the intelligence of an individual, I will get something called the intelligence quotient or IQ score. Using this IQ score, I will get an idea about how intelligent the person is. Not only that, I will also be able to compare this person's intelligence to somebody else. So, for example, if one person gets an IQ score of 100 on an IQ test and another person gets a score of 120 on the same IQ test, then we can comfortably say that there is a difference in their intellectual abilities, with the second person who gets an IQ score of 120 being a little more better in the way he is expressing his intellectual potential. So basically, the psychometric approach is a composite model where it portrays intelligence as a composite of abilities, which means it's a sum total of abilities. And these abilities are, we are able to measure these abilities by using mental or psychological tests. So the focus in the psychometric approach is on the structure of intelligence. What is intelligence made up of? What are the subparts or the different kinds of forms in which we can see intellectual behavior in individuals? Now, the groups of tests which we give to individuals to identify their IQ quotient or their intelligence, when we administer these tests to individuals under the psychometric approach, there is a kind of process of evaluation done where there is an identification of which are the items in a test which are grouping together or are coming together because they correlate highly with one another. The abilities which are being measured by those items are so similar to each other that they are able to group together or bunch together. So if participants perform, let's say, multiple tasks on a particular test, where there are different items and different assessments done in a particular test, strong performance on some of the items is likely to predict strong performance on other items. Why? Because all those items, let us say, for example, 10 items or 15 items, they are measuring something which is similar. That is why performance on these 10 to 15 items will come together or group together. You will find similar performance on all these 10 or 15 items. And the reason for that is that there is some underlying cognitive ability or underlying intellectual ability which is common to all of these 10, 15 items. So if somebody is performing well on, let's say, 5 or 6 of these items, we can predict that even on the other 5 or 6 items, the person is also going to perform some similarly well, because at the base of these items, there are common abilities. For example, if we take the skills or the abilities of vocabulary and verbal reasoning. Now, these are highly correlated. So, if a person's score is high on vocabulary, we can expect or anticipate that a person will also score high on verbal reasoning, because there is a high level of correlation between the two and there is something common between these two abilities. Now, if you look at all the theories of intelligence, as I told you earlier, there are two main approaches. So there are different theories under the psychometric approach, and there are different theories under the information processing approach. If you take the psychometric approach, which basically considers intelligence as an aggregate of abilities, you have the Uni-Factor or one-factor theory of intelligence, the two-factor theory of intelligence, the theory of primary mental abilities, hierarchical model of intelligence, and the structure of intellect model. Under the information processing approach, which basically is focusing on the processes which people use in intellectual reasoning and problem solving, you have three theories. You have the triarchic theory of intelligence, the PASS model of intelligence, and the theory of multiple intelligence by Howard Gardner. In today's video, we will be only focusing on the first theory within the psychometric approach, which is the Unifactor theory. So these are the 5 theories which I just mentioned under the psychometric approach, each given by a different individual. Alfred Binet gave the Unifactor theory, Charles Spearman gave the two-factor theory, Thurston gave the theory of primary mental abilities, Arthur Jensen gave the hierarchical model, and J.P. Guilford talked about the structure of intellect model. The Unifactor theory or the one-factor theory is one of the oldest theories in psychology, which talks about intelligence. Here, the viewpoint is that intelligence, according to this theory, is a fund of intellectual competence, which means I have a common database, you can say, of intelligence which is there within me, and I can use it for all kinds of cognitive activities or intellectual activities. And this is something which is universal. So if one has a fund of intelligence, then they can use it to cover any or all kinds of activities which require any kind of cognitive work. And therefore, that is the defining feature of this theory, that there is one fund of intelligence which is used for all kinds of activities. And depending upon how much of this fund of intelligence a person has, he or she will be proportionately successful. If a person has a very high fund of intelligence, then he or she will be successful in multiple areas of his or her life. Now, this is the answer to the question of the day, which I asked, that is, who is the person who had formal training only in law and not in psychology, but who gave something which was a groundbreaking research in psychology, and he is Alfred Binet.
So, Alfred Binet was asked to be a member of the Free Society for the Psychological Study of the Child. And because he became a member of the society, basically, this society was active at a time when French education was undergoing a transformation at the end of the 19th century, where there was a law which was passed that all children in between the ages of 6 to 13 should be educated in schools compulsorily with no kind of exclusions. But there were certain viewpoints in France at that point of time which believed that children who were not fit for education should be sent to a separate kind of institution for schooling them. And the person who was one of the people who was a proponent of this view was Bournville. He was a French psychiatrist and a politician. He felt that there should be certain boarding schools which should be established in connection with asylums, and children who were unfit for regular education should be educated there. Now, the Free Society for the Psychological Study of Children, where Binet was also a member, opposed this because they did not feel that a boarding school attached to an asylum, which is meant for psychiatric treatment of people with all kinds of psychiatric issues, would be the right place for children to study. So they said that there are anyway schools for children who have intellectual impairment. So why should we have now boarding schools that also attached to asylums? Because Bournville wanted to expand the scope of these boarding schools to basically encompass all kinds of children whom he felt were unfit for education. And not only that, even children who did not have very visible kind of intellectual issues were to be included in these kind of education systems, where they would study only in the boarding schools which were attached to asylums. So therefore, in French society, there were two questions which were debated. The first one was, who should educate these children who had certain learning issues? Should it be schools or should it be asylums? Second question was, who was to decide whether a child had a learning problem? How do we know whether a child has a learning problem? So, Bournville basically believed that the way to know whether a child has a learning problem is by assessment or a medical examination by a psychiatrist. But Binet and the society which he was a part of did not agree with this, because they felt that there should be certain objective criteria used to evaluate whether a child has an intellectual deficit or not. And because of this process, there should not be any child who is wrongly or erroneously labeled as having intellectual impairment when he or she may really not be having any impairment at all. So therefore, the question which was then important was, what should be the test therefore which we should give to children to identify or to know whether they really have a learning issue. And to do that, Binet started his initial work in developing a test or developing certain items which could be used to assess the intellectual ability of children. So he wanted to basically establish what would be the difference between the way a so-called normal or a so-called abnormal child would respond on these particular items, and therefore they would get a measure of which children would be having intellectual impairment and which children would not be having intellectual impairment. And therefore they wanted to measure this very objectively and very precisely. So based on his initial work of creating items to differentiate between intellectual impairment and average children, he developed, along with Theodore Simon, the initial IQ test. And therefore, this was the beginning of intellectual testing in the history of psychology. And therefore, we owe a lot to Alfred Binet and to Theodore Simon, who were the pioneers in creating tests to measure intelligence. Of course, their tests underwent a lot of revisions later, and of course, today we have many tests which measure intelligence. The credit of starting this movement towards assessment of intelligence goes to Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon. So his theory, that is Alfred Binet's theory, basically thought of intelligence as having a single set of abilities, which is of course the Unifactor approach. And these abilities can be used for solving any kind of problem which the person faces in his or her day-to-day life, in his or her individual environment. And therefore, Alfred Binet, he was one of the first psychologists who basically thought of intelligence, or the concept of intelligence, in terms of mental operations. However, when research was done on his theory, they realized that in real life situations, whatever ideas are being proposed by this theory are not really fitting well into how it's happening in the day-to-day life of the person. So let us say, for example, if you have a student who is very good in science and can perform scientific experiments very, very skillfully, this person may or may not always have a very good hold or grasp on languages and may have poor linguistic abilities. Now, if, as the theory says, that there is a common set of abilities which is responsible for the person doing well in multiple areas of his or her life, then how is it that a person who is very good in science is not able to do well in languages? Ideally, as per the Unifactor theory, he or she should be able to do similarly well in multiple areas, but that is not what was seen in day-to-day life. So therefore, this theory started becoming less popular as years went by, and therefore there was a conclusion reached that there is no single or unitary factor of intelligence, and there was more research therefore done later by other individuals, and they propagated their own theories of intelligence. So what we have learned today is basically what is intelligence, what are the approaches to studying intelligence, which is the psychometric approach and the information processing approach, and we also learnt about Alfred Binet's Uni-Factor theory. So if you like the content that I have created for you, please let me know, and it would be lovely if you could support me in this journey to bring you detailed content on various topics in psychology. So go ahead and share, like and subscribe to my channel Psychology with Dipali, and also follow me on Instagram with the same name. So till I bring the next video to you, it would be all from my end now. See you next time.